shows that the relationship between Russia and the U.S. has a huge impact to consumer prices. Just look back to March 2014. After Russia annexed Crimea, the U.S. imposed sanctions. But what happened was Ford's stock price went down. And this year, Russia started a war with Ukraine. And it's already impacting the U.S. auto industry. Russia is a major producer of critical metals for car production like nickel and palladium. Russia supplies nearly 50% of the palladium used to make catalytic converters. And most of the lithium-ion batteries in our cars come from Russia too. If Putin does decide to withhold Russia's metal supplies completely, U.S. car makers might not be able to produce internal combustion engine cars at all. The current Russian-Ukrainian crisis is also making prices of these metals skyrocketing globally. The cost of palladium per ounce has increased by 50% in just a few months. Imagine what's coming next. But there's something worse than the car shortage that's coming up. The conflict in Eastern Europe is putting a strain on the global food supply. A couple of months ago, President Biden warned Americans about an impending food shortage to come in the next several months. These food shortages won't only impact grocery stores, but they'll have a major impact on the auto industry too. Here's why. To understand how these global food shortages even came about, we have to travel back in time about 2 years ago, all the way back to March 2020. That's when the pandemic started spreading around the globe. Entire countries were going under lockdowns. Those lockdowns forced schools and restaurants to shut their doors for months. This completely blindsided the farming industry because the demand for their food products dried up, and so they had to destroy all the extra supply they had. For example, that included dumping tons of gallons of milk, plowing through entire crops, and even euthanizing their own livestock. But it wasn't only the farming industry that was suffering. With restaurants and businesses closing their doors for uncertain time, people lost their jobs, unemployment skyrocketed, and in the meantime, government printed money to send out stimulus checks. The problem was that this led to shortages at food banks. Really, the lockdowns in 2020 were just the first drop in the food shortage that will only get worse. In the months leading to 2021, grocery stores worldwide were already finding their shelves empty. But it's not over yet. Analysts expect these food shortages to only increase in magnitude. But now, it's not directly because of the pandemic. Now it's due to the conflict in Eastern Europe. And the effects of these food shortages are going to reach a lot closer to home than you might think. This past March, Biden spoke to reporters at NATO headquarters and warned Americans that a food shortage was impending. Because of the sanctions against Russia, Russia is retaliating big time. They've reduced exports of their natural gas, crude oil, grain, and rare earth metals. They've also reduced export of fuel for nuclear power plants in the U.S. And they're blocking shipping of wheat from Ukraine to the entire world. Here's what we do agree on now. They are anticipating that higher energy, fertilizer, corn, and wheat prices could impact the price of growing and purchasing critical fuel and food supplies here in America and around the world. Here's the thing. Ukraine and Russia are both major exporters of fertilizer. But it's not just the U.S. government who's talking about an impending food crisis. Farmers and truckers across the country have been sounding the alarm.
Up 66% this year, wheat up 22.7%.
For example, one man tweeted that farmers in the South can't get fertilizer for their crops and that farmers in the Midwest can't get nitrogen or fertilizers. He said, buckle up, folks, because the media isn't even warning you. Talk about sounding an alarm. Another farmer spoke out saying that he and other farmers across the country believe that dramatically increased costs for fertilizer will make it impossible for farmers to profitably plant corn this year. Operating costs for things like fertilizer, seeds, and liquid nitrogen are almost triple and quadruple the old prices. It will not be profitable to plant this year.